Hello YouTube, here's Gunther from Germany. Anthropologists found a bone fragment in a cave in southern Siberia in 2008. They explained that it was about 30,000 years old, probably from a 7-year-old child. The bone would be evidence of a hitherto completely unknown human species. The history of humanity must be rewritten. Wow, one can only wonder what researchers can read from such a find. I must admit, a DNA analysis by the Max Planck Institute in 2010 showed that the bone is actually about 30,000 years old and belonged to a species that lived about 1 million years ago. From this common ancestor descend Neanderthals and modern humans. What would the same scientist conclude from such a find on Mars? Or from this? You remember, NASA declares that Mars is completely dead. And what says NASA to a possible civilization in former times?
I would say that is extremely unlikely.
Science distinguishes proofs of quality and quantity. The mere existence of the hatch or the iron pipe is enough to prove that there was a civilization on Mars. Both examples also allow far-reaching conclusions. The hatch was either forged by hand or industrially manufactured. The same applies to the iron pipe. The required ore must have been mined and smelted, which in turn requires a lot, and so on. However, the examples do not allow any conclusions as to the size of the population or the concrete circumstances of their coexistence. Only a large number of different finds make reliable statements possible. In fact, Curiosity has photographed ruins of destroyed houses at almost every point of its journey, which can still be clearly seen despite the manipulation of the images by NASA. Adding this to the clues given by the first Viking mission to Mars in the region of Cydonia, where it found several pyramids, the face of Mars and other interesting objects, one concludes that Mars was likely similarly dense inhabited like the Earth. One question is of particular interest. What did the Martians look like? The first approach is the legendary face of Mars, which NASA explains as a poor play of light and shadow, pareidolia. Subsequent, obviously manipulated satellite images were made to prove this. There are no indications of the face in these pictures. The astronomer Dr. Tom van Flandern stated in 2004 in a lecture on the face of Mars,
in effort, when this was first presented to the American Astronomical Society in 1980, the astronomers DePietro and Molinar, who presented it, really made no claims for it, but other than to suggest that here was a possible artifact that ought to be followed up and explored. So that led a few scientists to form an independent group, the Society for Planetary Study Research, or SPSR for short. It's an amalgam of independent scientists who take the possibility of planetary artifacts seriously and investigate. And they came up with 8 possible tests that would distinguish whether this object was artificial or natural. By about a decade ago, we had 5 of the tests had come out positive for artificial, and 3 of the tests had indicated a natural origin. 2 of those 3 tests were that this object cannot be seen from the surface of Mars as a face. It can only be seen that way from above, such as by an orbiting space station or a spacecraft or from the parent planet. And so because you can only be seen from above, you would want to build it on the equator so that it has maximum visibility from any of those places. And this object was at 40 degrees north, and you would certainly want to build it upright so you could see it as a face and not tipped at some angle, and the object was tipped over at 30 or 35 degrees. So those tests indicated it was probably natural. Then one day somebody emailed me after a discussion on Art Bell and said, have you ever considered the possibility that exploded planet hypothesis you mentioned and the damage it did to Mars might have ended the civilization of whoever built the face on Mars? And he said, in that case, it must have been built before that pole shift you mentioned. And I thought that was an interesting point, so I went to the globe of Mars on my desk and put a finger on the location of the old pole of Mars before the planetary explosion event, and the present location of the face on Mars, and it looked like roughly a right angle. So I figured, well, I'll have to calculate it and see how it comes out. So I put the coordinates in the computer, and then plotted the old equator of Mars, which is on this diagram, on this graphic. And as you see, the face is practically right on the old equator, and it's upright with respect to it. So if we consider that the builders were before the explosion instead of afterwards, 2 more of the tests were passed. And the following year, the 8th test was passed also, so we had all 8 tests now indicating this is an artificial object.
There is another photo showing a statue that, for whatever reason, has not been smudged or erased as usually. If you turn the picture and complement the missing half of the face symmetrically, the face resembles a human and reminds of testimonies of a so-called megalithic culture. To me, it seems logical that the creators of a statue, like the sculptors in ancient Greece, had real role models. A human-like face with eyes, ears, mouth and nose also implies a human-like body with similar organs. Often, the dimensions of rooms can be guessed from the ruins, as here, for example. From this, one can conclude that the Martians were probably a little smaller than today's people. More reliable statements would be possible with those image areas where another has wiped out larger buildings. How did the Martians live? The pipe connections in the ruins indicate that their houses had water and energy supply like ours. Metal scrap and machine parts show a high degree of technology. As many ruins also contain broken columns with ornaments and stone slabs with decorations, there are some indications that the Martians were also interested in art. In short, the Martians actually lived just like us.
I would say that is extremely unlikely.
I think you will agree that there is no doubt about the existence of a civilization on Mars. But you can only find out how the Martians really lived when NASA releases the unretouched originals and no longer manipulates the new images of Curiosity. NASA could not exist without the billions of dollars from hardworking taxpayers. It's time for voters to turn to their MPs. The Senate and Congress must force NASA to tell the truth, because you cannot expect anything from the mainstream media. They are completely infiltrated by the intel services and spread only their lies.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for the good job you're doing. God bless.
Unfortunately, this is unlikely to happen soon. How long have we been waiting for the truth about the murder of JFK? Or 9/11?
This is World Trade Center 7 just before it collapsed on September the 11th, 2001. It had not been hit by an aircraft. It had been damaged by falling debris and fire. But by 5:20 p.m. most of the fires had been extinguished. Although the building was 47 stories high, it doesn't fall sideways, nor collapse unevenly. For this to have happened, all of the building's vertical supports must have given way at almost exactly the same time. Yet the Federal Emergency Management Agency reported that the collapse was due primarily to fire.
I would say that is extremely unlikely.
And we are still waiting. There's a German proverb which says, "Hope ever lasts to die." With this in mind, see you next time.